Thank you. Let's bow our heads in prayer. Our dear, kind, and gracious, loving Heavenly Father, as we open up this service this afternoon, we ask a blessing upon it, and we ask a blessing upon the new building that we have, through your direction and your leading, have caused us to build. And it is because of your gratefulness, or our gratefulness to you, that we are here today to celebrate this. In Jesus' name, amen. You may be seated. This time I'll have Jeff come up, and we've got some thank yous to give out.
We have been extremely blessed with some very generous, high-quality contractors and suppliers, and it's been a real blessing to work with them. And we want to thank them for their dedication and service and the work that they did for us. I know there was at least one of them was still outside. I'm not sure how many more of them are coming. So now that Doug is here, we can ask Doug to come up. Doug was our primary building contractor. Doug did the construction of the building, walls, roof, steel, sheetrock, everything. So Doug, we just want to present this thank you to you. And thank you for the work that you did. And yeah, if you do recognize the name, this is Cameron's older, better looking brother. Yeah. I just had to throw that in there. I usually hear that from Scott, not Doug, but you know, it's kind of a running thing within their family. So I don't see any of the other ones, so I'm just going to kind of go through them just briefly. Daryl Lundberg from Northwoods Lumber Company did all of the supplied all the materials. They also supplied our blueprints and a lot of our advice as to how to build most efficiently. And they also helped us set up our budgets. They were just a tremendous resource. So Northwoods Lumber, Blackduck. Then next, Greg's Plumbing, Eric Rolfe. They did all of our furnaces, our floor heat, all of our plumbing. So thank you to Greg's Plumbing. Todovich Electric. Todovich Electric did our electrical work. They also wired our security system and our internet stuff. So Tony was extremely good to work with and very flexible, because a lot of the stuff we had to make a lot of changes because we didn't have a real set blueprint for that. And really thank Tony for his hard work on that. Wes Olson Contracting did our slab and our sidewalks and patios and stuff outside. Kevin Thomas Logging and Dirt Work, they cleared the trees, leveled the soil off for us, and compacted and did all our grading, and even supplied some of our black dirt at the end. So thank you to Thomas's. N&B Drywall and Painting, that's just what you would expect. They did drywall and painting for us. Bill Widener did our epoxy floors. So if you notice how nice the epoxy floors are, that was Widener Painting. Juleson Plumbing and Heating, they didn't do any plumbing or heating for us, but they did do our septic system. So thank you to them for that. I will hold that one for a second. Dow Acoustical did our ceiling tiles. Clarity Glass did our mirrors in our bathrooms, which if you've been in there and looked, those are really nice. Steve Natras Flooring, did our carpeting in our classrooms. And Reed & Reed did our well. So that is the list of the main part of the contractors. Last but not least, Jeff, I have a thank you card here for the Minnesota Conference. Minnesota Conference invested the money that we had from our school sale, and we really appreciate the growth in that. And then also David coming up and wiring up and hooking up our internet and doing all of that. So thank you
I will
for
pass
you.
it on. Thank
Yeah, and we're hoping you can share that with the
you. Okay.
with the office.
Is it food?
It sure can be.
Thank you.
I'm hoping maybe it might turn into something healthy like donuts. Oh. Anyway, that is the list. I will work to get these thank yous to the people who were unable to attend later. Thank you.
Before you go away, Eldon, I would like you to come up as well. Cameron, are you here? And if you would just stand, Cameron, and Gary Reynolds as well. This is the members of the board of the building committee that put the building together and did all the groundwork to get everything underway. These four, I showed up on the scene to find out that there's a building project about to begin, and I said, well, nobody told me. And after having visited with a couple of them, I decided they can just run with this. I don't need to get involved. And so they have done a fabulous job putting this together. But I wanted Eldon to come up, and I want Jeff to be here, because Eldon did the kitchen work, and he hung the doors and this type of thing, and has done an extremely beautiful work. And we have
Yes.
greatly appreciated the work that you've done. And so we have a special card for you at the same time. And then we also felt that as important as every member of the committee was, Jeff has done the bookkeeping, he's acted as the general contractor, so we also have one for you.
Thank you.
Thank you much. And now I'll turn this over to Tom.
Jeff, key fob, change it.
Let me get you going. I want to make sure this is working properly too. Yep, that's it. And all we really need to do, this is already up and running. We just didn't give everybody access to what's going on. Now we will.
There you go.
We're up. Okay, can you hear me? Yes. I like that commercial. Can you hear me now? I don't have to use my choir director voice right now this time, but I just want to talk to you briefly about the history of the Bemidji Seventh-day Adventist Church School. We need to know where our future is going, and that future should be based upon a relationship with Christ. But we also need to be able to look back to where we came from and see how the Lord has led us. In part of the fourth commandment, when God said, remember the Sabbath day, it wasn't just to remember the Sabbath day, but it was to also remember everything that He has done for us throughout history, the history of this world since sin started, so that we could see His leading, not only in the children of Israel and all those that came before and after, but in our own lives. We need to be able to look back and see that leading, where we have come from, but keeping our eyes focused on Jesus. So we're going to look back a little bit. So we've got some pictures up here that we'll show, but we started as the Seventh-day Adventist Church back in 1919, roughly 1 year after the official organization of the Bemidji Seventh-day Adventist Church, which happened on October 6th of 1918. Patrina Ruskers was the first teacher of those students. The school was held in her home, and if you know where the last church school was, on 15th and Delton, just 2 blocks north of that location at 17th and Delton was a home. And I'm not really sure, I couldn't find out whether this building that is still standing in that spot, if that was still the original building that had been added onto that was the school way back then, or not. But anyway, just 2 blocks north of where our school had been is where the first school was started. It was held in her home. There were roughly 10 students that first year. Miss Ruskers had been injured as a child and was crippled. Days when she was not feeling well, she actually taught from her bed. Can you imagine that? That is true dedication. Once the church building on 9th and America was built around circa 1925, which you see on the screen, a building that I first went to church when we first moved here, students met for classes in the basement of the church. At one point in time, the teacher lived in a small room within the basement of the church. Years later, that was remodeled into a Sabbath school classroom. If you can imagine this, the teacher's salary was $27 a month. $243 for a 9-month school year, less than what we usually pay for a car payment nowadays in 1 month. But that was for a whole year, $243. There has been a couple periods of time when there wasn't an operational school due to the lack of students and or funds for a school. For instance, between 1936 and 1950, that 14-year period, there was no school. The longest period of time has existed after the school at 15th and Delton Avenue closed its doors at the end of 2002, until whenever, by God's grace, we get it going again. Then comes 1950, and there was a vote by the church to reopen a church school. Our very own Ramona Larson, as we heard this morning, having just graduated from Maplewood Academy and going to a couple sessions at Union College, was asked to teach. And so she is the one who started in 1950 with those students. So she had been asked by 2 conference officials that had came out, as she told the story this morning, and she accepted that call that the Lord had obviously given to her to start the school. Some interesting tidbits about the information during that school, and she hit on some of these as well too. So most of this information that I'm gathering, or that I'm presenting to you today, has come from the history that she has helped compile over the years. And has been the keeper of. If you noticed over in the gymnasium today, there was a couple books that talked about the history of the school with pictures and things over there. There's also a book that talks about the history of our local church as well, from its organization, and as well as the Community Service Center. So the school started off with nothing. Of course, they had to go to Reamer to get desks from one of the church schools that had closed over there, had been closed for some time. So they got desks from there. They've got textbooks from Thief River Falls, and I'm not sure where else, but they got enough information, enough materials to start a church school there. There was a small wood stove that was used on chilly mornings. Can you imagine Minnesota having any chilly mornings? We don't have chilly mornings here. But the teacher started that wood stove and kept it going until Pastor Emerson, who was the then pastor of the church, brought in a little wood-burning oil potbelly stove, and that's what Ramona was talking about again this morning. That year started out with, 16 students, and then there was 12 that school ended with that particular year. I'm not sure what happened to the 4 or 5 that didn't continue. Maybe they were just too cold. I don't know. As she talked about this morning, the plumbing froze, the pipes froze, and they even had to go a block down the street to go to the bathroom in the middle of winter at one of the neighbors' houses. I guess it was reported that year that Bemidji even had like 80 inches of snow that year. So there was a lot of snow. The school continued in the church basement until the decision was made to build an actual school. And this was the school that was built. So in 1955, a vote was held by the congregation to do just that, to build a church school dedicated to the Christian education. And the work began. A lot was available at 15th and Delton, our previous home for our church school, right across the street from where the Center thrift shop is now. And that was chosen as a site for the new school. Many worked hard and sacrificed a lot to build that first school building. The church entered a stewardship plan of 2% to help finance the school. A rail car of pulpwood was cut and hauled and sold to furnish funds. The first classes began September of 1956. Vera Johnson was the teacher and had all 8 grades. Vera Johnson is the grandmother of Eldon. So his grandma taught. The plumbing hadn't been finished, so water had to be hauled from across the street where 2 other Adventist families lived, where the center is located right now. There were no shades or drapes that covered the south walls that you see there with those windows. So when the winter winds were blowing, any sunlight that filtered through those windows to help warm that room was very welcome. The winter wind used to come underneath the back door, and it would come in from the dugout where the pump room was. So then in 1968, the North Home Church joined our school family. For a time, 2 teachers had separate classes with lower grades in the basement of the church at 9th and America, and the upper grades at the school at 15th and Delton. Then came the large 38 by 60 addition in 1971 to accommodate 3 teachers in 3 separate classrooms. At one time, we had 46 students in attendance. This was one of the notes that was kept as a diary by one of the families that lived across the street, one of the Adventist families, of the construction of the church. I know you can't see it, read it, but that was done back then so that they could document it. This shows some, and it's hard to see some of these, but these pictures and some others like it were over there at the school gym today, where you could see different activities that were going through, that the students did at the school. So we'll take a second and just kind of flash through some of these. And they were an active little school. People you probably, most of us here, wouldn't know or recognize. Just a bunch of different activities. Then we come up to my era. My family moved here from Southern California in December 19 of 1970, a day that will live in infamy. I am the product of Christian education, although I didn't go all the way through high school or university at one of our schools. I went from first all the way through 9th grade through our schools, to begin with at Loma Linda, and then from here at the second half of 4th grade. And I went to, as a student, I was in the basement of the church when we met there as a school, until the new school was finished. But I never forget the day that I stepped out of our car, having arrived December 19 of 1970, and it was probably 20 below zero getting here. My Aunt Eleanor used to call Bemidji, Burmidji, and now I'm well acquainted as to why. The first fall, with the new addition being added, the school was not quite ready to hold classes there, So we met in the basement of Dwayne and Teresa Wolfield's home on Birchmont Drive on the west side of Lake Bemidji. I don't really know how long we were actually there. It didn't seem like we were there a great deal of time, maybe a couple months or so, before moving into the school with a new addition. Eventually, the church at 9th and America was sold, and the school was used for Sabbath school and worship services until our new church building, which we're in now, was completed for services. So let's look at a few more pictures. I think this one is a 8th grade graduation in 1970. So some of Ramona's family, I think Donna Larson in those. Okay, not working. Oh, over here, okay. There we go. Just some, where the school was and some of the activities that they did. That was our school, with the new addition on the north side, where we had one large room and we could divide it with a divider to make 2 different classrooms there, and then a new kitchen here on the southeast corner. Anybody remember mimeograph machines? Do you remember the smell that came off of that paper, and you'd get those new freshly mimeographed pages and you'd sit there and smell them? I often wondered if that was the making of people sniffing glue or something, but glad that didn't happen. Anyway, some of the activities and things that we did as students during those times. This was an investiture. I know you can't read it, but this was an investiture program that we had at the school. Yeah, I think this was another one of our events. Okay, let's see. There we go. Some more school activities. At this point in time, I think we were in the mid-70s. Oh, is it going back on me? Yeah. Christmas plays. More activities. Graduation classes. Ramona kept programs of all of these things over the years. This was a day announcing the school beginning again. That was in one of our union papers. More graduating classes. And this was the graduating class, the second largest graduating class of our school. If I'm not mistaken, it had 5 students in it. Marlene Frischman, Dick Larson, Rocky Larson, Gary Reynolds, and Wanda Woolfield. 8th grade graduates. It was a big day back then for an 8th grade graduate. Now, you might recognize the 2 people, or at least one of those 2 people in the top picture. That was Mutt and Jeff. That was my older brother, Glenn, and myself. Class of 75. We had the largest graduating class of 6 students. The 2 gals in the lower left-hand corner was Polly Prosser from the North Home Church, Roberta Franklin, also from the North Home Church. Then there was Terry Cummings, my brother Glenn, and going to the right further was Brent Schumacher and myself in the front. Then we come to more modern day time when we had Mr. and Mrs. A in the school and various students that you probably recognize more easily now. Some of our girls. More activities. A bike-a-thon. I'm not sure. Did you remember what this bike-a-thon was about? Anyway. Then I think this was the church school contributing from Bemidji down at Maplewood, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, come on. This was a sad day. This was a farewell for Clinton and Leah when they were departing. Then Clinton teaching students. Mr. A. Now, I asked Leah if she would have any pictures that she would be able to share with us. And she shared quite a few. Some of them I couldn't use because they were too small. And then I was going through them and I saw this picture of Clinton. I thought, well, where is the picture of you? Well, she was always behind the camera. But this is what she sent me. She gave me a picture. So, Leah, I told you I could use this for blackmail. Yeah. Here's a very small one. I'm not sure how that still got in there. Probably can't see very well. You guys might remember this. Isn't that Ben and Brian? Adam? That's Adam. Okay. Adam. All right. Brian Jackson. Yeah, and that other one. More activities. We had a vibrant church school, people. It was wonderful. Concerts, Christmas programs by the school kids, led by, at times, certainly Clinton and Leah, but Mrs. O'Brien and other teachers that we've had through the years. I recognize most of those kids in there. Christmas plays, Christmas musicals, programs, memories. The Three Wise Men. Some ladies of the evening? I hope not. Not sure what part they played in that. Some more of our girls at the end of the sanctuary. This was when Jim was here as teacher at 1999 through 2000. I asked him if he had a picture too, and I got this from Carol. I said, well, at least it shows Jim and his best side. So we got Jim in there. After we voted that we needed to close the school, which was probably a very, very sad day in our church's history, this is a picture of the demolition of our beloved church school. So many memories there. We sold it, of course, I think in 2007, roughly. And someone was enough foresight was able to capture this moment. So I also, at this point in time, would like to ask Jeff if he'd come forward. I think it's important for us as a church family and people who are in the efforts of maintaining or building a school like we have just gone through, to know how God has led us, to see the evidence of where God has led. So, Jeff, if you'd like to take a moment and talk about that, please.
I took the time to write this down so I can make sure I got it in a nice progressional order. Since the old school building was sold, we never had a consensus or a real vision up until a couple of years ago. We began looking at a steel building. We thought we could build it with the money that we had saved up. We thought if we could get the shell of the building built, we could finish the inside ourselves over a few years and eventually have a finished building like what we have been blessed with today. The budget we put together was based on the construction and costs a couple, 3 years ago. We then discovered that we could build a wood frame building for similar money, and we shifted our focus to a wood frame building. On February 4th, 2024, the building plan was presented to our church in a business meeting. On the second vote, a new building on the west side of the parking lot was approved by the 70% supermajority, which we had established would be needed for approval. A building committee of Eldon Johnson, Cameron Jordan, Gary Reynolds, and myself was appointed to work through all the details. We adjusted the blueprint to what we have today, and we began getting bids. On May 28th, 24, the land clearing began. Once the trees were cleared and the ground elevation checked, we discovered how well the building fit onto that piece of property, and that way less fill was going to be needed than we had originally thought. Praise God, our first money savings. Then, as the bids started coming in, we discovered that the cost of construction materials had gone down since the original budgets were established. God's timing is perfect. He had us going forward at the ideal time. And due to the tariffs that are out there now, construction prices are rising again. With the pricing the way it was, we decided we could afford to add floor heat. We then discovered a potential big snag. Plumbing permits were backed up at the state and were taking approximately 3 months, which would effectively delay our construction for a year. We carefully formulated our plumbing plan to stay in what was called the small project category, and we submitted it. The prayers began. 3 or 4 weeks later, we got the clearance to have our local plumbing inspector review our plumbing plan and approve it. So we were able to proceed right away. God made a way for us. From there, we were blessed with many scheduling mercies. As busy as all contractors are, and as hard as it is to get some materials, contractors were able to work together and follow each other perfectly. Thanks to the material costs going down and contractors giving us breaks, at least I'm convinced they did. No one ever said they did, I'm just convinced they did. Prices continued to come in under our original established budget. These types of things can happen a few times and be coincidences, but when they happen throughout, we have to give credit to God. Amen. On August 4th, we had another business meeting where the building committee presented an update and the status of the project. It was decided that we would sell the property in Cass Lake and return the proceeds to our building fund. We then raised the budget for the building committee from $562,000 to $600,000. That would allow for the addition of AC and other improvements. God's blessings continued. Prices continued to come in lower than expected, and more things were added. We recognized that we had enough to install a security system and internet. We were able to get the ceiling finished and the flooring done. Donations and pledges kept coming in. We decided that we could afford to upgrade the kitchen to include the stoves and the dishwasher. Doing these upgrades during the construction process is way more efficient cost-wise than doing a remodel later or completing it later. God's blessings to this point allowed us to be doubly blessed. The building we originally envisioned to need a lot of work and money to complete is now finished and paid for. God's hand has been in this since beginning and throughout. What does God have in store for us? It's exciting to think what that might be.
Here you'll see some of the construction as it proceeded, as the building that now stands. Interior, I think that's looking towards classrooms and the bathroom off to the west. What it looks like with a little snow, because it's going to look like that soon enough. Melting snow. Mostly complete here. And I think it actually, what you see now when you drive up the driveway, I think it complements very greatly the church building, the property, the campus that we have now. One thing I would like to do is I would like to thank those who submitted pictures, Leah, Carol, my mom, and especially Ramona for all of the work that she's done in the history, keeping the history of our church, school, and center all there and alive for our archives. But I'd like to also ask those of you who have ever been a teacher or are a teacher in some capacity to please stand. Whomever has been a teacher or is a teacher currently, please stand. Thank you. I think they all deserve a round of applause and a great hearty thank you. The value of Christian education is immeasurable. And we have been entrusted to do that with the children that we have in our care. It's called a church school for a reason. It isn't a parent school or a student school. It's a church school. Because as Marty was talking about this morning, this is a family project. This is part of the church family. And we need to take a part in that and be responsible. And we can be proud now how God has led our committee and our church family in how He's led to be able to do this. A building not only for church school and the education of children, but for other ministries that we can do for our community as well. A multi-purpose ministry building. So thank you so very much, and I will turn the time back over to our pastor.
Thank you, Tom and Jeff. Thank you very much. Don't want to take up a lot of time. We've been sitting a lot today. We've been visiting a lot today. I just have a couple of notes that I would like to say, and I too am a product of Christian education. In a school that was 100 miles south of here in Brainerd, Minnesota. Now, I was told that it used to be there used to be a little white church on South 7th Street in Brainerd, and that's the first church that I remember as a kid growing up before they built the one on Oak Street. That there was a one-room school there, and they got this brilliant idea that they were going to step out in faith and build a two-room school at Whiter Road, which is in Baxter today. In fact, the school was vandalized sometime at one point, and they called the sheriff to report the vandalism, and they said the school is located at such and such an address on the Whiter Road, and the sheriff's office goes, "Where is the Whiter Road?" If you go down 371, it's right off there. It's so much different than it was back then. But they built it with faith, and they went into debt in order to do this. And in order to pay for the construction, they had to work out a deal with the Minnesota Conference to build cabins at North Star Camp. And so all the original cabins that were there when I was a camper, and Sandy was a camper, and probably Clinton as well was a camper, all those cabins on the boys' side were built by the Brainerd Church to pay off the debt that was incurred in building the two-room school on the Whiter Road. So I'm very happy that for $601,000 we have that and it's paid for. I stopped at the hospital and visited a man that isn't even a member of our particular church. He's a member of the Minnesota Conference. There's another church in Minnesota. I stopped and happened to visit with him. 3 days later, he gives me a phone call and says, my wife and I have decided to donate a sum of money, and it was a significant sum of money that went into the construction of the new school. It was a blessing that this happened. This reminds me of 3 stories that I want to go through real quick. They all come from 2 Kings. The first one comes from 2 Kings chapter 4, verses 2 Kings chapter 4, verses 4 through 7. Hopefully I got that right because I see my notes are confused. This is the story of the woman whose husband has died, who has 2 kids, and she comes to Joshua looking for help. And Joshua says, what do you have? And she goes, all I've got is a little bit of oil. And so he directs her to go out and collect as many jars as she possibly could, and that then they were to go in their house and fill those jars with oil, and the oil never ran out until their faith ran out, and they stopped collecting jars because they thought there was no more. The third story, our second story, is from chapter 6 of 2 Kings, verses 1 through 7. The school of the prophets was being added onto, and a boy had borrowed an axe, and Elisha had gone with to help construct this. And I like the object lesson of this story. Is the axe flies off, the head of the axe flies off and lands in the Jordan River. And the boy is all concerned because the axe head has fallen into the river. How is he going to get this back? Because he's trying to be a good steward of the resources that were loaned to him. And if there's one thing I can say about this church and the construction of that building, it has been given to us by God, it has been loaned to us by God in order to serve the community, in order to serve the, pardon the pun, the kids that are not here yet. But we have stepped out in faith to do this, hoping and knowing that at the right time, God will send the kids for our school that we have faithfully constructed. The third story comes from 2 Kings. 2 Kings chapter 2, verses 19 to 22. This is just shortly after Elisha has become a prophet, and Elijah has gone to heaven. Elisha comes to Jericho, and Jericho says, hey, the people of Jericho are saying, hey, there's something wrong with the land here. They just can't produce like it should. Can you help us? And he asked them to bring a new bowl with salt in that new bowl. And then he sprinkles that upon the water, and the water is purified. When I was a kid in the church school in Brainerd, it was emphasized that we send our kids to church schools so that they can be missionaries, that they can be doctors and nurses and teachers and pastors. And I got a hold of this idea, and I said, not me. That wasn't until a New Year's Eve party in 1979, which kind of changed everything, in which I've honestly received my call. But the point I want to make is, Our church schools are put here for a specific reason and a specific purpose. Not everybody that attends church school is going to be a missionary in a foreign land. That would be great. That would be fabulous. But I spent 36 years in a different profession other than a pastor, spreading the gospel message to those that I worked with. The principles that I learned in church school stuck with me even during the period of time when I really didn't want to be in church but knew I had to be there, so I sat in the pew. The principles that I learned in church school stuck with me. And when the opportunities arrived, I wasn't a missionary in a foreign land. I was a missionary to those around me. And this is the purpose of our church schools. And I like the fact that Jeff Scoggins has brought, our conference president, has brought this tent maker philosophy into the conference. Because our church schools should be an area where we make tent makers with the aid of the conference and the local churches that can become the salt of the earth. As Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount stated so well, ye are the salt of the earth. Each and every one of us here has been called to be a missionary in the community in which they live. To be a missionary to the people that are around them. Whether you're a plumber, whether you're an electrician, whether you are an automotive technician like I was, whether you, whatever profession it is that you happen to go into, the principles that you learn when you're in Christian education, it's just not arithmetic. It's just not reading and writing, the 3 R's, right? It's just not about that. It's about learning about God in a family that loves you so that you're able to love others and share that same message with those around you. So I am proud that this church has stepped forward in faith and chosen to build this beautiful building in which we, as a church family, can shape the missionaries to our community for the future. At this time, I would like to invite us all to quickly go to the new building. And Jeff Scoggins, our conference president, will have our dedicatory prayer.